Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be back in the relatively cosy confines of the Doubletree. As Moira said, I look after the welfare rights team at Digby Brown, and we provide support, advice and assistance to people trying to navigate the social security systems. This is my 20th year as a welfare rights professional. I'd like to say the job gets easier. That's not the case, and there are certainly some challenges there for people. Now, one of the ways that we provide our support is through producing our guide to benefits. Now, on the screen here, unless everyone goes 3 feet away, they won't be able to read the text, but you should be able to see on the table a copy of our newly refreshed guide to welfare rights. So I'm going to talk you through this for the next 15-20 minutes or so. Happy to take a wee question or two at the end. So we have produced these guides for many years now, and we've actually produced 4 slightly different versions. But given especially the amount of change over the last 2 to 3 years, I thought this year I'd like to revisit it and start with a blank page and think about the information that we presented, how we presented it. So this is what we've done this year to create a new single benefits guide. So after the contents and introduction, the first main thing to point out, and this is really one of the biggest changes that we've seen over the last few years, is to point out that we now have a very distinct Scottish benefits system that operates separately from the UK benefit system. So we have now in Scotland Social Security Scotland, that are the equivalent of the Department for Work and Pensions, and this first page describes the benefits that Social Security Scotland deliver for the Scottish Government. Now, this includes the whole range of disability benefits, which I'll come to in a section later, as well as some other smaller niche benefits, such as the Best Start grants. At the back of the guide, there is a link to the mygov.scot website, which has full details of all of these different entitlements, how much you might get, and different criteria for accessing them. The green section there basically describes the benefits that are still reserved to the UK government and delivered by the DWP. So in the main, this includes things like universal credit and income replacement benefits such as ESA. The UK benefits for disability, such as personal independence payment, are still in place. The UK government's also responsible for the state pension and other statutory benefits such as statutory sick pay. The next page, page 5, makes another very broad distinction between different types of benefit. And again, this is something that comes up very often. We get questions about this regularly. It's to describe benefits either broadly as means-tested or non-means-tested. Now, means-tested benefits take into account income, savings. So the bullet points here include the so-called capital limits that describe the amount of savings you can have before they are taken into account when you're claiming means-tested benefits like universal credit. It talks about the criteria that they look at, and they are distinct from non-means-tested benefits, which broadly includes things like your disability benefits, your historically PIP, now things like adult disability payment. Now, these entitlements don't take account of earnings, whether it's income from yourself or a partner, if you have one at home, so are less problematic in terms of keeping them up to date. There's a little box out here, and there's a few of these little exclamation points that I've tried to include to highlight possibly the most important thing to think about on the subject. And here it just points out that it's really important, if you claim a means-tested benefit, to update the benefits agency with any changes that might affect your entitlement. Over the page, on page 6, we've got income replacement benefits. Now, again, big changes over the last few years have introduced universal credit, and that process of migrating all of these so-called legacy benefits that universal credit replaces has now concluded. We had a lot of people we helped last year to make this transition after they got these so-called migration letters, which would say you have been getting a historical income-based benefit and you now must move over to universal credit. Now, that process of migration has been concluded. It notes here the 6 benefits that universal credit replaces, including things like income-based ESA, housing benefit and tax credits. And the bullet points here basically describe the different so-called elements that make up a universal credit claim. Universal credit works quite differently from the legacy benefits. It's paid monthly. It needs to be managed online. They work out based on your circumstances, how much you should get each month. And on the opposite page, page 7, what we've done is provide a table of sorts with do's and don'ts. Again, feedback that we get from clients often describes mistakes that are made, difficulties and problems that come up. So these do's and don'ts here hopefully will give people some useful practical pointers around the things that they need to bear in mind and the mistakes that they could potentially make. The little box out here with the exclamation mark picks up on something that we come across all the time, and that is where when someone has a universal credit claim, often they make the mistake of thinking if they phone the helpline or even go into the journal and type a little note and update, it will be actioned and taken into account. Not the case. An oft overlooked bit of universal credit is using the report a change link on the homepage when you log in. And it's important that whether it's a change in the household composition, your savings or income, or childcare responsibilities, you go in and report that change in the correct way, because it's very, very difficult to correct errors. And it might mean if you don't do that, even if you think you have, you might not be getting paid as much as you should get. And also potentially it means that you could be getting paid more than you're entitled to, which again presents some issues that we'd rather avoid. The next page, page 8, talks about statutory benefits. These are benefits that are paid and entitlements that people have under the law, and they broadly include things like statutory sick pay. So if you're off work for the first 6 months, your employer will pay you statutory sick pay through your pay slip and get that money back from government. It also includes things like statutory maternity pay. This page also describes contributory benefits. Now, here we have job seekers allowance and employment support allowance. These benefits haven't been fully replaced. The income-based versions of them have been replaced by universal credit. So previously these two were called contributory job seekers allowance and contributory ESA. They then decided to call them new style job seekers allowance and new style ESA to make them distinct from their income-based versions. They're now simply calling them job seekers allowance and employment support allowance. Now, these entitlements are not subject to means testing in the same way that universal credit is, but look at your recent national insurance contribution history. So at the point you claim, they look to see from HMRC if you've got national insurance contributions that are paid up. There's a little bit in the guide about what to do if you don't have a national insurance contribution, and entitlement is based on those. Page 9 talks about a couple of other so-called income replacement benefits. Now, if you're not a job seeker and you're not unable to work based on ill health. The third broad category, and many people in the room here will fall into this category, is that you have full-time care responsibilities. So this is where the carer support payment, as it is now called, that's the Scottish equivalent of carer's allowance, goes into payment. It talks a little bit about the criteria there and things to be careful of. One of the issues that you might be aware of was the big problem with carers allowance overpayments last year, which led to a lot of problems for people. So there's a little bit here about keeping yourself right on that. Other income replacement benefits obviously includes the state pension. So when you retire, and we're getting towards a retirement age of 68 for men and women, that's a process that's been going on for quite some time. You'll be able to claim your state pension, again, based on your national insurance contribution history and assuming that you've got at least 35 years' worth of national insurance contributions. Also noted here, it's not exactly an income replacement benefit. It's more typically described as a pension, as industrial injuries disablement benefit, which obviously based on the work that Digby Brown do, we help people access this as a benefit that you get if you've had an injury or developed an illness through work. It doesn't have anything to do with liability. It's not concerned with blame, but it's an entitlement that you get if you've had a long-term injury in those circumstances. Overleaf to page 10, we talk in a bit more detail about the disability benefits. As I say, that's really the biggest single change that we've had over the last few years. So Social Security Scotland have now rolled out fully 4 replacements for disability benefits that prior to this point had been delivered by the DWP. So we have adult disability payment in place that now has replaced personal independence payment for working age adults. We have the child disability payment, which replaces child disability living allowance. We have pension age disability payment, the most recently rolled out benefit, which replaces attendance allowance for people that have hit the age of retirement. And finally, something they're calling Scottish disability living allowance. This is a very niche benefit. There are some people that were claiming disability living allowance that hadn't had their claim migrated to personal independence payment. So what they decided to do with those people was just create a Scottish version of DLA. These benefits are pretty much the same as their predecessors. They have a daily living component and a mobility component. On page 9, you can see a couple of tables describing how they actually work, how to apply, what their key features are. So it points out that the criteria are pretty much the same in these Scottish benefits as their UK equivalents. Scores are made up from so-called descriptors under each activity. There are 10 in the daily living component concerned with difficulties you have at home. There are 2 questions under mobility. Under each, if you get 0 to 7 points, you will not get an award. If you get between 8 and 12 points, you'll be offered the standard rate. If you get 12 points or more, you'll be offered the enhanced rate. Something else I wanted to include and make quite explicit as well, because again, it's something that's often overlooked. There's a bit here about how to answer questions. And people sometimes struggle to interpret what the meaning is behind a question, especially if you don't necessarily have welfare rights advice. So when anyone is answering a question in one of these benefits, you need to ask yourself whether or not you can do the activity safely, to an acceptable standard, repeatedly, and within a reasonable time period. That's quoted from the actual legislation that describes how these benefits work. And like the predecessors, any difficulties you describe, you need to have experienced or need to be experienced for at least 50% of the week, the majority of the week. Again, it's never a simple question of yes, I can do it, or no, I can't. It's always yes, but. So when you're looking at these questions, think about these criteria when you're answering. The last little bit here points out, and again, this is the same as their predecessors, that any difficulties that you experience need to have been something that you've had for 13 weeks up to the date that you claim, and likely to experience for at least 39 weeks from the date of the claim. Now, the box out here on page 11 is pointing out that if we do get a decision for one of these benefits we're not happy with, we have the right to challenge the decision. We'll come on to that a bit more shortly. Page 12 talks about other forms of help. This comes up often. Council tax liability is something that's overlooked quite regularly. I've already spoken to someone earlier on this morning about issues here. Council tax reduction is the benefit that essentially provides a subsidy to your council tax bill for the main portion of the bill. The water rates aren't covered by council tax reduction. Entitlement is automatic if you get universal credit, but even if you don't, you can still apply. It will be means tested. Council tax exemption is something, again, that we deal with quite often for the brain injured community. Someone who can be described as severely mentally impaired. This is a very broad description. It can be exempt from liability. So, for example, if they are living on their own, they will be rendered invisible and there will be no council tax liability. If they're living with a partner, and this exemption is offered, they will get the 25% discount because the house will be treated as though there's just one person living in it. The third little thing that I've noted here is the disabled persons reduction. So if adaptations need to be made to your home, for example, to accommodate a wheelchair or to create a bathroom or a bedroom on a ground floor, then you can apply to your local council and they will reduce your council tax band by one step. So, for example, if you were a C, they will reduce it to a band B. Page 13 talks about help with getting around. Again, this is a really important entitlement. A blue badge is a really crucial form of help to let people have a good quality of life. So a blue badge issued by the council based on certain scores and criteria on the mobility component of a disability benefit. It's not essential. It makes it a bit easier. You can still apply if you don't have this, but it allows you to do things like park on double yellow lines and access council car parks and car parking spaces for free. You don't need to be the driver, of course. You can nominate 3 vehicles that you regularly use. There's also a wee bit here about vehicle excise duty, road tax that can be exempt, and concessionary travel. Again, there's information in more detail at the back of the guide. Page 14 talks about medical assessments, another a big important category of advice. Again, this is laid out as do's and don'ts. Medical assessments are a fact of life, whether you're claiming universal credit or a disability payment. These entitlements come with some form of discretionary assessment. So, for example, here we point out the importance of making sure that if there's evidence that you want the benefits agency to see, don't assume that they will have it or they will access it or they will try and get it. Anything you want them to see, even if it's really old evidence that describes an injury that happened a long time ago, it's really important to make that available, especially for adult disability payment and the Scottish disability benefits, because the key point of difference here is that they have dropped the compulsory assessment that almost everybody would have when they were going for something like PIP. So Social Security Scotland have said that they want to see medical evidence by the claimant, so it's really important to provide that if you want them to see it. It talks about issues that potentially come up during medical assessments. You want to make sure that if you contact them, if there's been a change, and this is one of the things that comes up, you only do so if you are looking for them to change your entitlement. Often people sometimes call Social Security Scotland or the DWP to say something has changed without realising that that's inviting a new assessment or a review. They're just trying to do the right thing. So it's one of these wee pointers to bear in mind and look out for. The very last section of the guide, on page 16, is about challenging decisions. This is the most difficult aspect of welfare rights. If you get a decision that you're not happy with, we always encourage people to take up their right to challenge the decision. These are done at the first stage internally, whether by Social Security Scotland or the DWP. If you still don't get a decision you're happy with, that opens the right to access a tribunal through HM Courts and Tribunal Service if it's a reserved benefit from the DWP, or through the more newly created Social Entitlement Chamber of the Scottish Tribunal Service, which I have been having some difficulties with. They're still finding their feet a little bit. Trying to engage in an appeal is very, very challenging indeed, so certainly something you want to do after you get, or with help and support from a welfare rights professional. And as I said, at the very end here in page 18, we have got a list of links and phone numbers for reference and getting more information. And that is a whistle-stop tour of our brand new benefits guide. I'm really keen to get feedback from people because it's a new version, it's a new way of presenting the information. If we get feedback on what works, what doesn't work, this is something that will change and refine every year. So please do let me know your comments. What we're going to do, hopefully at the start of next month, is put an electronic version of this guide up on the Head Injury Information Directory for everyone to see and look at leisure. And of course, we've got hard copies of this at the Digby Brown desk and in our little bag for anyone that wants one. And so with that, Moira.
Thank you very much, Douglas. That was really helpful. I think we've all become aware of the major changes within the benefits system in recent years, and personally I find it a bit of a minefield. So I'm always very grateful to have the support and guidance from Douglas and his team. Can I invite any questions anyone might have for Douglas? The mic's just coming.
Hi there. I'm a disabled man since the age of 48. You just referenced in your speech earlier on today, sir, about the pension age now starting at 68. I received a letter recently from the Benefit Agency in written form to say my pension would be paid to me at the age of 67. Could you clarify the difference, please?
So it's not quite 68 for everyone quite yet. They're getting towards that point. So we've had a scenario for many years now where the date at which you will receive your state pension is based on your date of birth. It's actually something you can go and check. If you just Google, when will I get my state pension, you'll see a link to go and put your date of birth in, and it will tell you. So it's not quite 68 for everybody yet. They will reach that point within the next few years. That'll be for men and women. So yes, some people are getting their pension a little bit earlier at this point, and it's based on this system that they've been rolling out for several years.
Hi, the other thing I'm curious about, you just referenced towards the end there, the booklet you were talking about and the sections you were going through, is that available in other formats? So say for talking, say somebody's visually impaired and can't read, is there a visual version or a braille version?
That is a very good question. In fact, I've been talking to Certis Advocacy this morning about how we think about potentially creating a more accessible version of the guide. It's very information dense. I've tried to make it less information dense compared to previous versions. I've lost a lot of the words, but yes, we will be actively seeking advice from subject matter experts, lived experience panels and the like, to give us feedback. Potentially we might be able to produce a different copy of the guide that's more accessible, a bit more concise, and perhaps a wee bit easier to read for people with visual impairments or sensory impairments. So yes, that is absolutely something that we're going to be looking at.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
Hi, I just want to say that I suffer from brain damage, and Douglas and Digby Brown do an awful lot. Now, this booklet is a great thing, but what you've got to understand, there's moments when I couldn't speak properly. I didn't know the question to ask the benefit people. But I was so lucky I could speak to Douglas, and Douglas did it for me. So we've got to appreciate these things and say thank you. Also, great work for the future. So thank you all very much.